The summer of 1874 came dry and cruel to the Missouri plains. Dust lay heavy on the rows of corn that never reached their ears, and the sky burned white as a furnace. For Clara Whitmore, that year marked the end of everything she'd known, the house of her childhood, her father's steady voice in the pulpit, and the gentle rhythm of a life that had once felt safe. Her father, Reverend Whitmore, had buried more neighbors than he had baptized by that spring. Cholera and hunger took them quick, and when the Reverend himself fell sick, there was no doctor left to summon. He died in June, leaving Clara with nothing but his Bible, a cracked china teacup, and debts to men who'd grown harder than the land itself. Clara was 19, too old to be a girl, too young to be hardened, when her Aunt Miriam came from St. Louis to arrange what she called a practical solution. "A girl alone can't make a life out here," she said, fanning herself with a church bulletin. "There's a paper in town, the Matrimonial Gazette. Lists of good men in the territories seeking wives, settlers, ranchers, even lawmen. They'll pay your fare if you agree to marry." Clara had stared at the notice printed in tidy block letters. "Honest man of 30 seeks God-fearing bride to share ranching life in Arizona territory. Faith and fortitude required. Write to Samuel Crow, San Miguel." The name sounded steady. Safe. She wrote him a careful letter in her best script, not expecting a reply. But a fortnight later, a sealed envelope arrived with train tickets, a ring, and a promise of a new beginning. On the morning she left Missouri, she stood by the station with her small carpet bag and her father's Bible tied with ribbon. The air smelled of soot and wildflowers, and the whistle of the train cut through her like a blade. Westward, the conductor called, and she stepped aboard. The journey took 6 long days. Each mile carried her farther from the familiar, from green fields to red rock, from cool rain to blistering sun. The other passengers eyed her curiously, a lone girl traveling under a wedding promise. She slept little, her dreams filled with the face of a man she'd never seen, one she imagined to be fair-haired, sun-browned, strong of jaw and gentle of heart. When the train hissed to a stop at San Miguel Station, the land outside the window took her breath away. It wasn't land at all, but flame and stone, vast mesas rising like ancient temples, cacti standing guard, the air humming with heat and silence. She stepped down in her pale blue dress, clutching the photograph that had been sent, a faint likeness of a man in a wide hat, with a mustache and the ghost of a smile. But as she scanned the station platform, no man in a hat approached her. Instead, the sheriff himself came forward. "You, Miss Whitmore?" he asked, removing his hat. "There's a man waiting outside town for you. Calls himself Samuel Crow." Her heart steadied. "My fiancé," she said, though the word caught strangely in her throat. The sheriff looked uneasy. "He ain't what most around here would call a settler. But he's a decent man by all I know." Confusion pricked at her. "What do you mean?" "You'll see." A wagon waited beyond the station, drawn by 2 lean Mustangs. The driver was a young Apache boy, his black hair tied back with leather. He said nothing, only motioned for her to climb in. They rode in silence, the town fading behind them, replaced by open desert. By the time the sun leaned low and red over the horizon, she saw smoke curling from a cluster of lodges in the valley. Her pulse quickened. "Where are we going?" she asked. The boy only said, "To Nantan Lobo, Samuel Crow." The name struck her like thunder. Apache. Her hands clenched the seat. There must be a mistake. "I was to marry a white settler." When they arrived, the boy helped her down. Warriors stood around the campfire, their eyes sharp and unreadable. Then one man stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar down one cheek and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore no hat, only long dark hair bound with copper beads. He spoke quietly, his English measured but fluent. "You are Clara Whitmore," she swallowed hard. "I came to marry Samuel Crow." He nodded once. "That is my name among your people." The world seemed to tilt beneath her. You deceived me." His gaze didn't waver. "The letter was written by my friend, the interpreter. We made a promise for peace. The white settlers fear us. They trust more when one of us takes a white wife. It was not meant to shame you." She took a trembling step back. "You can't mean to go through with this." "I must," he said simply. "The treaty depends on it. So do lives, mine and my people's." Tears stung her eyes. "And what of my life?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and something in his face softened. You are free to choose, but if you refuse, the treaty breaks and blood will come again. I would not force you, yet if you stay, I will honor you as my wife." The ceremony that followed was simple. The Apache elders spoke words in their tongue. The sheriff and 2 settlers served as witnesses, and Clara stood silent, her heart a storm of anger, fear, and strange awe. The man beside her, her husband, never touched her, never spoke above a whisper. When it was done, he placed a hand over his heart and said, "From this day you are called White Dove, my people will protect you." That night, under the blaze of 1,000 desert stars, she sat alone by the fire, listening to the wind rush through the canyons. Her husband approached quietly, a wrapped bundle in his hands. "This is for you," he said, setting it before her. A small wooden box carved with unfamiliar symbols. A wedding gift. She brushed her fingers over the smooth lid. "What's inside?" He gave a faint smile. "You will know when the time is right." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her with the firelight and the distant echo of drums. She lifted the box, hearing nothing within, feeling its mysterious weight. Somewhere in that wild crimson land, something in her began to shift, the first crack in the wall between fear and fate. And though she would not admit it, Clara Whitmore of Missouri felt the desert's heartbeat inside her own. The dawn after her wedding rose soft and red over the Apache camp, painting the canyon walls with fire. Smoke from the morning fires curled upward, carrying the smell of sage and mesquite. Clara sat outside the lodge she'd been given, a rounded shelter of woven reeds and clay, feeling the weight of her new life settle like sand in her chest. She had slept little. Every sound of the night had been strange. The cry of coyotes, the faraway chanting, the rhythm of drums that seemed to echo through the ground itself. When she finally opened her eyes at dawn, she was startled to find that her husband, Nantan Lobo, or Samuel Crow as the whites knew him, was gone. Only his blanket lay folded neatly beside hers, a quiet sign of courtesy. It wasn't what she expected from a man of war. When he returned, he carried a basin of cool water and a folded blanket embroidered with geometric symbols. "You should wash," he said in his calm, low voice. "The day will be hot." Clara hesitated before nodding, murmuring thanks. He set the basin down without looking directly at her, then straightened and spoke again. "You will meet my people today. Some will not like you. They do not trust easily, but if you walk with respect, they will see." "I don't belong here," she whispered, though part of her wondered if saying so would make any difference. He met her eyes, gray and unflinching. "Neither did my mother once," she frowned. "Your mother?" She was half white, he said quietly. "Taken from a settlement near Tucson when she was a girl. But she stayed. She learned our ways. When she died, our people said her spirit rides with the hawks." Clara didn't know what to say. In his words there was no bitterness, only a deep old sadness that felt like the desert itself. That day she followed him through the camp, where women ground maize and children ran barefoot among the lodges. The men watched her in silence, not cruelly but warily, as one might watch a creature from another world. She caught glimpses of herself in their eyes, pale, stiff-backed, foreign. A few women approached, offering her woven bread and soft smiles. One, older and lined with years, touched Clara's hand gently. "White Dove," she said in halting English. "You strong. He choose well." Clara looked to Nantan in confusion. He translated softly. "She says you have a brave heart." A strange warmth stirred in her then. Not love. Not yet, but something that eased the fear a little. As days passed, she learned more of the man called Samuel Crow. He was not just a warrior, but a trader, dealing horses, hides, and silver with nearby towns. He could read and write, spoke English, Spanish, and Apache alike. When he rode into San Miguel, even the sheriff tipped his hat. Once she asked him why he had chosen the name Samuel Crow. He smiled faintly. "My white teacher gave it to me when I was a boy. He said the crow is clever. He survives what others cannot. I took it for my own." "You had a teacher?" He nodded. "A missionary. Before your people burned his mission, he taught me words. Words can build bridges," he said. "I have tried to remember that." At night he taught her some of his own language. Simple words at first. Water. Sun. Heart. He laughed softly when she stumbled over the pronunciation, a sound that startled her for its warmth. And slowly, without realizing when it began, Clara stopped feeling like a prisoner. One afternoon, while fetching water from the stream that cut through the canyon, she heard the sharp rattle of a snake. She froze, spotting the coiled diamondback only inches from her skirts. Panic stole her breath. Before she could move, a blur of motion swept between them. Nantan, his knife flashing once in the sun. The serpent fell still. He turned to her, eyes dark with concern. "You must always look where you step," he said, breath quick. She could only nod, trembling. You saved me." He sheathed the blade, his expression unreadable. "You are under my protection. Until death." That night, when fever from shock overtook her, she woke to find him sitting beside her, cooling her brow with damp cloths, whispering words in Apache she couldn't understand. His touch was careful, never bold, his gaze turned away except when necessary. By morning, her fever broke. She opened her eyes to find the first light touching his face. Strong, solemn, and handsome in a way she had never noticed before. "You should rest," he said softly. "You watched all night?" He didn't answer, only poured her water from a clay jug. Something unspoken passed between them then, fragile as the desert dawn, a respect that neither had asked for but both could feel. When she could stand again, he brought her something wrapped in deer hide, a small wooden box, its lid carved with Apache symbols she had not seen before. He placed it in her hands. "Your wedding gift," he said simply. She turned it over, curious. It was heavy but silent. "What's inside?" His lips curved in that quiet half-smile of his. "Something you will understand when the time is right. Do not open it until your heart knows." "Knows what?" He looked out toward the red cliffs beyond their camp. "That not all gifts are meant to be touched. Some must be felt." She wanted to ask more, but he had already risen and walked away, leaving her to stare at the mysterious box in the sun. Over the following weeks, she saw sides of him that no white woman ever had. He spoke with his warriors about crops and defense, never raising his voice. He traded fair with the settlers, even when they treated him with suspicion. He was feared by some, respected by others, but among his people, his word was law. Clara began to see the truth the world refused to admit. This man was not a savage, but a leader, one born of patience, pain, and pride. Still, there were nights she wept quietly, remembering Missouri, the rain on the church roof, her father's voice reading psalms. Yet when she looked out at the endless desert stars, she could not deny the strange beauty of this place. The silence, the space, the way the wind seemed to sing her name through the canyons. And sometimes, when she caught Nantan watching her across the fire, that same wind seemed to whisper something else, something she dared not name. One evening, the old woman who had first welcomed her approached again, smiling as she handed Clara a woven shawl. "For wife of Nantan Lobo," she said. "He brave man. He need brave woman." Clara thanked her, her heart fluttering oddly. Later, when she told Nantan what the woman had said, he gave a small knowing nod. "She is right. You are stronger than you think, white dove." She looked at him then. Really looked, at the scar on his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet sorrow that never quite left his face. And for the first time, Clara Whitmore of Missouri wondered if her coming here had been fate, not misfortune. As the fire burned low that night, she touched the wooden box beside her bed. She still hadn't opened it. But for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to. Autumn crept into the Arizona territory with a kind of quiet menace. The days were still fierce with heat, but the nights grew cold, the air sharp with the smell of mesquite smoke. The desert shifted its colors, ochre turning to crimson, cactus blooms giving way to dust. Clara had learned by then to rise before dawn and grind maize with the other women. Her hands had blistered at first, but calluses came quickly. She wore a woven skirt now instead of her old blue dress, and her sunburnt skin had darkened to a bronze glow. The people no longer stared when she passed. Some even nodded in greeting. But peace in the camp was fragile as glass. Rumors drifted from San Miguel, cattle stolen from the settlers. Wagons raided along the river trail. Clara overheard the men talk in low voices around the fire, the way soldiers did before battle. The name Apache was once again whispered with fear in town and with bitterness in the hills. One afternoon, Nantan rode in from the trading post, his horse lathered and eyes grim. He dismounted, tossing the reins to a boy, and went straight to where Clara was mending a torn blanket. "Pack what you need," he said quietly. "We may have to leave for the high country." She looked up sharply. "Leave? Why?" "The settlers say my people stole cattle from their ranches." Her heart clenched. "Did they?" He shook his head. "No, but outlaws ride under our shadow. Whites see hoofprints and think them ours. The sheriff sent men to investigate. It will not end with questions." She rose, gripping the fabric in her hands. "Can't you speak to them? You trade with them. They trust you." Nantan gave a faint, weary smile. "Trust dies quicker than love, White Dove." That night fires burned higher and sentries doubled their watch. Clara lay awake, listening to the distant cry of coyotes and the whisper of drums. Fear and sorrow twisted together inside her, not just for herself, but for the people she had come to understand, if not yet call her own. By morning, she made a decision. When Nantan saddled his horse to ride to San Miguel, she stepped in front of him. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. His brows furrowed. "No, it's dangerous. The whites may not see you as one of them now." "Then let them see me as your wife," she said. "Maybe that will remind them that we are not enemies." For a moment he stared at her, then nodded once. "Very well, but you stay close." They rode through the desert together, he on his painted stallion, she on a smaller bay mare. The air shimmered with heat. From a distance, San Miguel looked peaceful, but as they drew closer, Clara saw men gathered by the saloon, rifles slung across their shoulders. The sheriff stepped forward, looking startled to see her. "Miss Whitmore," he began, then caught himself. "Mrs. Crow." Clara dismounted and faced him squarely. "You know my husband is an honest man, Sheriff." "Tell them so." The sheriff's eyes shifted nervously. "It ain't that simple, ma'am. Some folks say they seen Apaches near the Murphy Ranch the night the cattle went missing. And some folks will see what they want to see," she replied, her voice firm as steel. "Do you have proof?" He hesitated, and in that silence the crowd began to murmur. A rancher spat in the dirt. "Proof? We don't need it. You bring savages into our towns, you get blood?" Nantan's gaze didn't waver. "If you seek blood," he said quietly, "look to the men who profit from it." The tension snapped like a whip. The sheriff barked for calm, but the hatred in the air was thick. Clara felt it pressing against her chest, and the fear, the fury, the ignorance. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. "If you harm this man," she said, her voice ringing clear, "you'll answer to me. He is my husband, and I will stand with him." The words stunned everyone, even Nantan. A hush fell. After a long moment, the sheriff cleared his throat. "All right," he said roughly. "No one's hanging anyone today. But keep your people clear of town, Crow. Tensions are high." Nantan nodded once, and the two of them rode out. Only when they were miles from the settlement did Clara release the breath she'd been holding. "You shouldn't have done that," Nantan said quietly. "They could have turned on you." "I couldn't just stand there," she said, her voice trembling. "I couldn't let them talk about you that way. You've done nothing but protect me." He looked at her then, long and searching. "You spoke like a warrior." She gave a shaky smile. "Or maybe just a wife who's tired of being afraid." That night, back at camp, the air between them felt different. Charged, like lightning waiting to strike. As they sat by the fire, he handed her a cup of sweet cactus wine. The flames danced across his face, softening his features. "Why did you defend me, White Dove?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Because I see you. Not what they say you are. What you truly are." His eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, voice low. "And what do you see?" Her breath caught. "A man who carries more honor in silence than most do in words." He smiled faintly, then looked toward the fire. "You are brave, Clara Whitmore. Too brave for this world, maybe." The silence that followed was thick with things neither dared to speak, and in that stillness she realized that the fear she once felt for him had turned to something far more dangerous. Trust. Days passed. Peace held, but barely. Then one moonless night, chaos came roaring back. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. The camp was burning, lodges aflame, horses screaming in terror. Gunshots cracked through the night. She stumbled out of her hut to see masked riders storming the camp, torches in hand. "Nantan," she screamed. He appeared through the smoke, firing his rifle with deadly precision. "Get back," he shouted. "Hide!" But before she could move, a blast threw her to the ground. The world spun, fire licking the edges of her vision. When she came to, the camp was chaos. Warriors fighting back with bows and rifles, women dragging children to safety. Nantan was surrounded. 3 outlaws bore down on him, one striking him across the head with a rifle butt. He fell dazed, blood streaking his temple. "Leave him," she cried, running forward, but a hand seized her arm. It was the old woman, the one who had called her brave. "No, White Dove," she said fiercely. "If you die, Hope dies too." The words burned. Clara looked once more toward Nantan, bound, being dragged toward the canyon, and made a choice that tore her soul in two. She ran. Through the smoke and the screams, she fled into the desert, clutching only one thing: the small wooden box he had given her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't let it fall into their hands. By dawn, she collapsed beneath a sandstone arch, her dress torn, her throat raw from dust. The horizon flamed with sunrise. She pulled the box from her satchel and held it to her chest, weeping. Inside that simple carving lay the last piece of him she had left. She pressed her forehead against it and whispered, "Please, God, don't let that be the end." And as the wind rose through the canyon, carrying with it the smell of smoke and blood, Clara Whitmore vowed she would not rest until she found her husband again, no matter how far she had to ride. The desert at dawn was a cruel kind of beautiful, quiet as death, vast as eternity. The sun rose over the jagged horizon like molten gold, spilling across the sand and stone, touching the world with fire. Clara Whitmore lay beneath a crooked mesquite tree, her face streaked with soot and tears, her heart pounding with one terrible truth: Nantan was gone. Captured, bound, dragged away by men who saw him not as a husband or a man, but a savage worth hanging. She sat up, her throat dry and burning. The wind carried faint echoes of hooves, distant, fading westward. They were taking him to San Miguel, she realized. The same town that had spat his name like poison, the same town she had defended him in. The sheriff might mean well, but those outlaws were no deputies. They were killers for hire, paid to finish what the settlers had started, and she was the only one who could stop them. Clara stood shakily, dust clinging to her torn skirt. Around her neck hung the silver crucifix her father had given her, tarnished now, but still shining faintly in the light. She pressed it once to her lips. "I won't lose him," she whispered to the wind. "Not like this." Her mare, frightened and scraped from the night's chaos, stood tethered nearby, still trembling. Clara soothed her with a trembling hand. "We're going to find him, girl. We're going to bring him home." She saddled. The horse, with what little strength she had left, tied the wooden box tightly to her satchel and turned toward the open desert. The ride was agony. The land stretched endless before her. Red mesas, dry riverbeds, scattered sage. Heat shimmered off the sand in waves that twisted the air like smoke. But Clara rode on, guided only by instinct and the tracks she could still faintly see. Hoofprints cutting across the wash. Each mile seemed to strip her of another piece of the girl she once was, the preacher's daughter from Missouri, the frightened bride who had stepped off the train in a blue dress. What remained was harder, leaner, and carved by the desert itself. By midday the sun was merciless. Her lips cracked, her throat burned, her body screamed for rest. She shaded her eyes and spotted movement in the distance, a column of black smoke rising beyond the canyon rim. Campfire, she thought, or worse. Cautiously she rode closer, the mare's hooves whispering over sand and stone. As she reached the crest of a ridge, she saw them. 5 riders gathered near a cluster of rocks, their horses tethered, rifles glinting in the sun, and tied to a post at the camp's edge and beaten, bloodied, but alive, was Nantan. Her heart nearly stopped. She slid from her horse and crouched behind a boulder, watching. The outlaws were drinking, laughing. One tossed a tin cup into the fire. Another paced near Nantan, jeering. "Filthy Apache," the man spat. "You thought you could outsmart us? We'll fetch a good price for your scalp." Nantan said nothing. His head hung low, blood streaking down one cheek. Yet even in defeat he held himself with the quiet dignity that had first unsettled her. Clara's hands shook. She had no weapon, only her courage and the wooden box still strapped to her side. She looked at it now, desperate. It had been his gift, sealed since their wedding night. Something in her heart whispered, now. With trembling fingers, she untied the cord and lifted the lid. Inside lay a folded piece of woven cloth, a sash of crimson and gold, and a letter written in both English and Apache. The paper was weathered, the writing precise and firm. Clara, if ever you open this, it means the path has tested your heart. You are free, free to leave me and return to your world, or free to stay and make this one your own. I will never bind you, not in body or spirit. This cloth is the mark of a wife among my people, but you may wear it only if you choose me, not from duty but from love. Nantan Lobo, Samuel Crow. Tears blurred the words. For so long she had thought the box a mystery meant to control her, when all along it had been the opposite. A vow of freedom, a gift of choice. Her breath shuddered out. You fool, she whispered, smiling through tears. You noble, impossible man. Something fierce and new ignited in her chest. Love, clear, bright, and burning as the desert sun. She tore a strip from her skirt, tied the crimson sash across her shoulders, and looked toward the camp. I'm coming, Nantan, she whispered. Then she mounted her horse and rode down into the canyon like a ghost from the sun. The first outlaw saw her too late. She charged through their camp, scattering their horses with a scream that made the desert echo. Her mare struck one man square in the chest, sending him sprawling. Clara snatched up his dropped rifle and fired, the report splitting the silence. Nantan's head jerked up. Clara! She galloped toward him, bullets whining past her ears. One outlaw lunged at her. She swung the rifle butt hard, sending him tumbling into the fire. Flames roared. Nantan, though half-conscious, managed to twist against his bindings. Cut me loose, he shouted. She slid from the saddle and slashed at the ropes with a knife she'd taken from the fallen man. The last outlaw raised his gun, but before he could fire, a war cry split the air. From the ridges above came the thunder of hooves. Nantan's brother, Tosa, led a small band of Apache riders down the slope, arrows whistling. The outlaws scattered, overwhelmed. In the chaos, Nantan pulled Clara behind a rock, shielding her with his body. Are you hurt? He asked, voice raw. She shook her head, tears streaking her dust-stained cheeks. No, but I'm all right. He looked at her then, seeing the crimson sash tied over her shoulder. His breath caught. You opened it, she nodded, voice trembling. I chose you, Nantan. I choose you still. For a moment everything fell away. The gunfire, the smoke, the world. There was only his gaze, fierce and full of wonder. When the fighting ended, Tosa dismounted and approached, blood on his arm, a grin splitting his face. You have brave woman, brother, he said in Apache. She rides like the storm. Nantan smiled faintly. Like the storm and the dawn. Clara leaned against him, her body finally giving way to exhaustion. His arm wrapped around her, steady and strong. As the last flames died and the wind cooled the canyon, she whispered, I thought I'd lost you. You can never lose what rides within your heart, he murmured. She looked up at him, eyes shining. Then promise me you'll never ride alone again. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, gentle as the desert wind. Not while you breathe, white dove. They left the canyon at sunset, the sky bleeding gold and crimson, the same colors as the sash she wore. Behind them, the tracks of battle faded into dust. Ahead, the road wound back toward home, toward their people, their peace, and whatever future they could carve from the wilderness. That night, as they made camp beneath a starlit sky, Clara lay beside him, her head on his shoulder, the fire crackling low. Your gift, she whispered. It wasn't just freedom, was it? He smiled softly. No, it was my heart, given to the one woman strong enough to carry it. And as the desert winds sighed through the canyon, carrying the scent of smoke, and promise, Clara knew she had found not only her husband but her destiny. Weeks passed before the desert knew peace again. The smoke from that fateful battle drifted away, leaving only the faint scars of fire on the canyon walls, black reminders of hatred that had burned and died in the dust. Nantan Lobo healed slowly. The wound on his shoulder turned to a pale scar, and though his strength returned, his movements carried the quiet caution of a man who had looked death in the eye and come back. Clara never left his side. Each day she helped the women rebuild the lodges, mended hides, and carried water from the river. The people no longer looked at her with suspicion. Children followed her now, laughing as she taught them English words, and the older women smiled when they saw her wearing the crimson and gold sash across her shoulder, the mark of a true Apache wife. Even Tosa, Nantan's brother who had once doubted her, bowed his head when he passed. "The white dove has fire in her heart," he told the others. "She rides beside the chief, not behind him." For the first time in her 19 years, Clara Whitmore felt she belonged somewhere, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as part of something larger, older, and stronger than herself. A tribe bound by earth, by blood and by love. One evening, as twilight melted into the canyon, she found Nantan sitting near the edge of a cliff, gazing out over the desert plains. The wind tugged at his long hair, and the fading light painted his face in shades of amber and bronze. "You should rest," she said softly. Stepping beside him, "I rest when the land does," he replied, his voice low. "There are still men who hate what they cannot understand." She sat beside him, her skirts brushing his leg. "Then let them see what love can build. Let them see that peace isn't weakness." He smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "You speak like a chief's wife. And you," she said with a teasing glint, "speak like a man who forgets he has one." He laughed, a quiet rumbling sound she had come to love. "Perhaps I do." They fell into comfortable silence then, the kind that comes only when two hearts beat in the same rhythm. Below them, the desert stretched vast and endless, the last light glinting off the distant river like silver. "I have something for you," he said suddenly. He reached into the pouch at his side and drew out a small object, a pendant of silver, shaped like a bird in flight. It caught the firelight, gleaming warm against his palm. Clara looked at it, puzzled. "It's beautiful, but what is it?" He turned it over, revealing the metal's uneven texture, melted, molded anew. "It was once the lock from your wedding box," he said quietly. "I melted it down and shaped it with my hands." She gasped softly, tears springing to her eyes. "The box? But why?" "Because locks keep hearts closed," he said. "And yours opened mine." Her breath caught, and for a moment she could not speak. She took the pendant in her hands, feeling its warmth, its weight, its meaning. "Nantan," he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Wear it always. It is not gold or silver that gives it worth, but the story it holds. A gift from the man who once thought love was a chain, and learned it was a wind instead." Her throat ached with emotion. "And what of me? What do I give in return?" He smiled softly. "You've already given it. You stayed." The wind shifted then, carrying the scent of rain, a rare blessing in the desert. Far off, thunder rolled like the drumbeat of the earth itself. Clara rose and looked toward the horizon where clouds gathered in dark folds. "Rain," she whispered. "It's coming." Nantan stood and wrapped an arm around her waist. "The land drinks and life begins again." When the storm broke, the tribe rejoiced. Men lifted their faces to the sky, women sang. Children danced barefoot in the red mud. Clara laughed among them, the rain soaking her hair, her skirt, her skin. She felt alive. More alive than she had ever been in Missouri. More than she had ever been in the narrow pews of her father's church. And in that laughter, in that storm, she understood what her marriage truly was. Not a contract of survival, but a covenant written by the wind, sealed by the rain. The months that followed brought change beyond the canyon. Word of the Apache woman, the white bride who had defended her husband in front of an armed crowd, spread through the towns. The story softened hearts little by little. When spring came, the sheriff of San Miguel rode to the camp with a small escort. He dismounted and approached Nantan with an awkward bow. "Crow," he said, "we've drawn up new trade terms with the ranchers. I reckon it's time we ended this fightin' for good. You'll have safe passage to town, and fair pay for your horses." Nantan studied the man, then offered his hand. "And your people will have safe passage here. No blood for blood." The sheriff nodded, then turned to Clara. You done more than you know, ma'am. Never thought I'd see peace like this in my time. Clara smiled. Peace isn't given, Sheriff. It's built. That night a celebration was held. Fires blazed across the valley. Drums echoed against the cliffs and laughter rose into the star-strewn sky. Whites and Apaches sat side by side, breaking bread, trading stories, watching the same flames dance between them. Clara wore the silver bird around her neck, gleaming against her sun-kissed skin. When Nantan took her hand and led her before the gathered people, silence fell. He raised his voice so all could hear. Once I took a wife for peace. I thought duty was stronger than love. But this woman taught me otherwise. She gave her heart not to a name, not to a people, but to the truth between two souls. He turned to her then, eyes shining in the firelight. Clara Whitmore of Missouri, white dove who rides with fire. Will you stand with me again, not as a bride of treaty, but as a wife of choice? Her heart swelled, tears glimmering. I will. He smiled, that quiet storm-gray smile she had first seen at the train station so long ago. Then he placed the pendant against her chest, his thumb brushing her heartbeat. Then let all who hear the wind know, he said. Our hearts are one. Cheers rose around them, the voices of two worlds mingling into one song, a sound that carried far beyond the camp, beyond the canyons, into the very soul of the desert. Later, when the fires burned low and the stars hung heavy above, Clara and Nantan walked together to the edge of the cliff where it had all begun. The night air was cool, scented with rain and smoke. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. That letter you sent? The one that brought me here? He smiled faintly. Only that I did not send it sooner. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Then we both found what we were meant to. Below them, the desert stretched silent and infinite, not a place of death, but of rebirth. And as the wind stirred the sand into whispering shapes, Clara Whitmore knew the truth she would carry for the rest of her days. She had not been forced into a marriage. She had been led to a destiny, one written in the language of the land, sealed with the rain and crowned by a gift of the heart that left everyone who heard their story utterly speechless.